regarding the Kentucky Continental Englander. We're going to be hearing 9 items today, and 4 of them involve closed session. We'll be taking general public comment at the outset of the meeting, so if anybody has a comment on a matter of general interest, please fill out the card to the floor. General public comment card as of this moment. Now, so interpretation and effective government expectation to be possible. But in any event, it's after 2 o'clock. It's after 2 o'clock, so we're going to close general public comment. We'll now take public comment on a closed session items, items number 1, 2, 3, and 4. If there is any public comment on those matters, moving forward. Seeing none, comment on the closed session items 1 through 4 is now closed. So we're now recess to closed session, and then we'll be back to resuming over here. And the first order of business is item number 4. My recommendation is to approve advancing the motion to council to instruct the city attorney, to request the city attorney to perfect the city's rights on appeal in the Contreras case, and to ask for a report back at a future date regarding the status of that appeal and the related issues involved there. And without objection, that will be the action of the committee. That brings us then to item 5.
Item number 5 is the controller report relative to the preliminary financial report for fiscal year 2011-12, which provides detailed information regarding the fiscal year-end closing results for the reserve fund, along with status of the general fund and the city's bonded indebtedness.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, committee members. Matthias Farfan for the Office of the Controller. Before I begin, I'd just like to, the Controller and her staff would like to extend their appreciation to all city departments and offices that cooperated in closing out the year-end. As you know, this was the first year we were closing out the year with the new financial management system, so we were able to accomplish that. And the report you have before you is a preliminary financial report. I'll first give you a brief description of the report, then touch on some report highlights, and then a few issues that are also identified in the report. The preliminary financial report, it's an annual report prepared by the Controller's Office, and it always reports on how the city closed out the fiscal year, budgetary basis. So it does include the final amounts of how the city closed out the 11-12 budget in regards to revenue and also the status of the reserve fund. It also serves as a starting point for preparing the financial the financial reports that'll be GAAP compliant. So that'll be the schedule of expenditures of federal awards that'll be used as part of the single audit and also the city's CAFR. It includes 6 recommendations on page Romanet 9, and these recommendations are regarding transfers and advances from the reserve fund, reappropriations, and prior year encumbrances. So the controller's requesting that those recommendations be approved. Regarding the report, some highlights. The main highlight is how the reserve fund, how we ended the fiscal year. As of June 30th, the cash balance was $242.3 million. This equated to roughly 5.5% of actual 11-12 general fund receipts. Description of how this amount is derived is included in the report. It's table 1, which is on page Romanet 2, and it pretty much goes through a few items that make up that amount. In summary, that amount is derived by whatever the cash balance was as we closed out the fiscal year. We add the reversions at year-end to that amount, and then we also subtract the year-end reserve fund advances to that amount, and that's how that $242.3 million amount's derived. Later on in the report, there are some adjustments that are made to the reserve fund balance that are year start adjustments, and those brought down the reserve fund balance to $224.9 million, which is roughly 4.94% of 12-13 revenues. Regarding issues identified in the report, and this has to do with the recommendations that are in the report, deal with prior year encumbrances. And as you know, at year end, if departments they keep funds encumbered, then those funds that cash does not revert to the reserve fund. So, and these are items that we've been working with the CAO on to perform a review of them to see if some of those items can be disencumbered, and then that cash could revert to the reserve fund and boost the reserve fund. Also, the reappropriations. At year end, the funds that revert to the reserve fund, some of those are reappropriated into the current year budget, and those also, the larger the reappropriations, then that also brings down the reserve fund balance. And also at year end, there's reserve fund advances that are made to special funds that due to tardy receipts. Those as well, we usually will report on those quarterly as far as what the status is on those reserve fund advances. And we encourage departments to pay those back as quick as possible in order to also boost up the reserve fund cash balance. The last item we touch upon in the report is in regards to banked overtime, and that's an item which in the last few years there's been a change in policy and where we've allowed departments to bank overtime. And it's understandable that that would cause an increase in year-end banked hours, but we're already going on 3 years now with the change in policy, and every year it's been increasing at year-end every year, and that's just something we think there should be some monitoring of those amounts just to make sure that they don't keep on increasing. That said, if you have any questions regarding the report, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz?
No.
Mr. Englander?
No, I just do, my comment is, first, thanks for bringing all this forward. I think in light of also what we've recently heard based on the work of our CAO, of our budget chair, and really the direction of the city, I've heard recently that there may be a potential to be upgraded on our bond ratings. Can you, and I'm sure this weighs into it a lot, the fact that we've been a little more fiscally managed better. Can you weigh in on where the discussions are? Do you have any input from a controller's perspective on?
Well, on that, I would defer to the CAO. Their debt group that does work with the rating agencies, and they coordinate the whole. The rating agencies will ask questions, and then they'll coordinate the responses to those questions. Controller staff does assist in the response to those questions. But.
And Ben Sahel to CAO, based upon our discussions with actual rating agencies, the wording that was presented in some of those press releases was actually not as favorable as one would hope. So in actuality, in discussing with the rating agencies of Moody's and Fitch, what they're actually doing with the City of Los Angeles is looking at our judgment obligation bonds, which are backed by the general fund, as well as our general obligation bonds, and they're actually looking at those not for an upgrade, but just to see whether or not they will be put on a negative watch or downgrade. So the ones that they're looking at for potential upgrade are not related to the general fund.
Okay, thank you very much for that report. We'll note and file the report, and appreciate your coming down. All right, thank you. Without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. All right, that brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6 is the controller report relative to authorization to extend the contract with Muni Services Incorporated and to release a request for proposals to award a new contract for property tax allocation services.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, honorable council members. My name is Shane Min, and I represent the Controller's Office. Before you is a contract extension with Muni Services. Muni Services looks at property tax allocations and identifies misallocated property taxes and brings the funds into the City of Los Angeles. We pay a contingency fee on all the misallocated funds that they discover. Our current contract has been in place for 5 years. It expired in April of this year. We were informed by the contractor that they had identified some additional items, but without a valid contract, we can't go ahead with that. So we're asking for a 1-year extension of that contract so that that audit can be completed. And also we're asking for permission to go ahead and release an RFP to select a new contractor.
Okay. Has this proposal been reviewed yet by the Inspector General for Revenue Collections?
No.
And what would be the anticipated contingency fee that would be payable to the new contractor?
We don't know as yet because we haven't released the RFP, so we don't know what they're going to propose. The current contract pays out 14.5% on identified misallocated property taxes, which the city receives. It's based on receipts, actual receipts, not on what they find.
So I know there's quite a limited number of potential contractors who do this kind of work, but have there been changes in the narrow marketplace, if you will, since 2006 when this last was contracted out? Have there been changes that you anticipate would require a significant alteration or would hopefully provide some kind of a savings to the city over that 14.5% rate? Or would you anticipate that rate would be something similar to that again?
I suppose anything I say at this point of time would be purely speculation. I do not know what the market is out there at this point of time. I could find out because the Office of Finance went out for similar services for documentary tax, for misallocated documentary taxes. So I could ask them how their response went. So.
And it was with the same contractors, I recall, wasn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. I think they also contracted with Muni Services.
Okay.
There are, I believe, the two main providers out there are HDL, Cone, and Muni Services. As far as I understand, that those are the two main providers.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Mr. Inwood?
Thanks. You said there are 2 or 3 main. Are there any that have been established in the space in previous years, or is that the last look that you've identified since 2007 or 2006 when this first went to RFP, or are those the 2 or 3 main responders into that last RFP?
Those were the 2 main responders in the last RFP.
So we don't know in the last several years if people have emerged at all
No.
in this space?
No. So which is why an RFP would be good, but what we're asking for that one-year extension is that I believe some of the work has already been done by our current contractor in terms of, identifying misallocated property taxes. They've let us know that they have identified about 365 errors. I don't know how much the dollar amounts are concerned, with that amount.
Does the one-year contract, is that all they have left on an extension at this time, or do they?
No, actually, they've gone through all 5 years. In April of this year, they finished the 5-year term.
So we can continue this year to year to year if need be, is what you're suggesting, or is it?
Only if the city council approves it.
Of course. Would it make sense if we did approve this to also ask at the same time for an RFP this year to go out, that we approve it with that contingency, and then also work with our new revenue inspector general? Thank you. In working to put that together, I would think this has been a real key focus. I mean, in 2006, we certainly weren't in the same budget and fiscal crises we're in now. The world has changed. I would imagine there's other people in the space as well, and it may behoove us to look at that, look at new practices and models, and working with all the things that we've uncovered since then. Perhaps there's even things we would add to the contract to go after, in light of, in the last few years, we've learned we're losing nearly $30 million in parking revenue from auto parks, for example. That's a separate vendor that does that, I think out of Texas. So there's all these different folks out there. So the question is, should we work with our police commission on permits as well, bring them in on the RFP, because they're the ones responsible for a lot of the collections on permits as well. And it sounds like we could do a lot more within the next year. So that would be the direction that I would think we can go in, is to, if we approve this 1 year, but we looked at putting out an RFP as well.
Councilmember, I believe the request is to issue an RFP.
Right.
So this would extend the contract through June 2013, since the contract actually has expired. At the very least, there would need to be an extension up to the current time frame.
Okay, but and this is all property tax revenue, correct?
That is correct.
So with the other permits and fee revenue, I don't know if those are all different and independent collection companies and agencies. I know some of those contracts have also already expired. And so is there anybody who's looking at this as a citywide approach to collecting these outstanding fees and taxes? And that's my interest.
Sure.
Trying to figure that out.
In terms of the other stuff, I believe that's under the purview of the Office of Finance. We look at property taxes because Controller's Office is the office that records property taxes and calculates the rates and does the allocations for that. So that's why we're doing this RFP and not the other RFPs. Also, when we do release the RFP and we receive the proposals from the companies, we do have the CAO's office and the Office of Finance on our selection committee. So both those offices will be involved in the selection of the vendor. So if there is any kind of matters that need their input, I'm sure they will be able to provide it at that point of time when we make the selection of the vendor. I don't know if that answers the question.
Council, since RFP hasn't actually been released, it might be appropriate to have the Inspector General do a review of the draft RFP and make some suggestions based on the other RFPs he has recently reviewed for the Office of Finance.
Yeah, I actually think that it makes a great deal of sense to do that, and the point is well taken that since we're doing this in other areas as well, there may be efficiencies of scale that can be realized by consolidation of a number of RFPs for a number of different areas of taxation as well. So I think the point is well taken. We might actually get a better deal out of that.
Can we go on the record as well? And if I could, Mr. Chair, the errors they found well over 300 or 365 different errors in collection systems and problems. As part of the contract, it's saying that we've got to continue the one-year contract because they're the ones that have identified these issues, the 365 errors that may result in additional property tax revenue, but those services, the errors that were found should be property of, if you will, that work product of the City of LA, not Muni Services. So we just make a note on the file that we recognize that they were paid to find those errors by us, and therefore that's proprietary information to us, where they, in other words, couldn't come back and bid and saying we're the only ones that know where the problems are in LA, that because those were internal mostly errors from my understanding.
Council member, they haven't been paid for these findings as yet, because they're paid on a contingency basis. So only after they discover it and the City of LA receives the money from the misallocated funds will they get their payment.
Well, I understand that.
Right.
But what I'm suggesting is, do we have copies of all the errors? Do we have the information on what they found in the systems and processes?
No, they wouldn't disclose those until they presented they would present the findings to the county, so that the county can actually apply the wrongly
What I'm
allocated.
suggesting as part of this extension is that they supply that information to us, since we're actually the owners of record, if you will. We contracted with them, whether they're on a contingency or not, that we maintain that information as well while they're doing it on our behalf and receiving the contingency. I understand that.
Right.
But they should be, as part of the condition of the extension, I would think that we should suggest to them that we approve it with us getting copies of all the records that we should own. It should be part of our work product. And if I could ask the chair, maybe he's got some thoughts into that as well, because we haven't received that information yet. We've been told they've identified it, and most of those, from my understanding, those errors were internal in the City of LA. That would be my only suggestion on this, and I would suggest then that we move forward, but okay.
Yes, and I agree. Matias Farfan with the Office of the Controller as well. I just want to mention that that the city extending this contract with Muni Services doesn't preclude us from contracting with another firm to perform their own discovery services. So when we go out to RFP and we do execute a new contract, they don't have exclusive rights to represent the city. We just want to make sure that the items that they mentioned that they've identified, that we do collect on those as soon as
I
possible.
get it, but what I'm suggesting is, let's say they went out of business tomorrow, or let's say something radically happened to them, or let's assume that those items continue for beyond the one-year extension, and a new firm would come in and under discovery representing us have full information to find those errors again, but they're recreating the wheel. We found many of those errors, 365 errors, if you will, that some of which could be computer glitches, some of which could be things we could fix internally, so they're not reoccurring. I think it's in our best interest to receive that information.
Yes.
I think it clearly would be in our interest. The bigger question is whether it's feasible, given that this is a service that's provided for which the only compensation is the contingency on collection. And so it might be possible that as a condition of extension of the contract, there's...
Have we asked?
Yeah, I guess that would be the first question, whether that would be something that could be negotiated with this contractor before we were to grant an extension. What's your best take on that?
Well, that would be unlikely. It's the wording in the actual current contract. It's just the project deliverables. The way we calculate the contingency for the firm is when the city actually does receive payment. At that point is where they'll submit all the detail which pretty much proves that through their work we received the revenue.
I get it, but here's the concern I have. Does the next year on the contract continue them not only going after the ones they found, but trying to discover new ones as well?
It would.
Okay. And so they're going to hold us hostage, because what's going to happen here is when we go out to RFP and they come in and say, well, we've got another 300 in the bank, or 400 or 500 errors that we're going to go after. So you need to award us the contract because those are still pending, but we're not going to give you that information or share it with you. And we would have to then hire a company to start all over if we didn't go along with them. I mean, it guarantees them that they have a stronghold on it, and we can't negotiate in our best interest when they have proprietary information that should be work product that we own. It should be a shared collaborative effort. Well, they have the responsibility to go after it, and they get paid on a contingency basis for recovery. I understand that. But if we're not getting the information, we're going to be in the same boat when we go out to RFP. That makes no sense. That's not even practical.
Yes,
Unless
but
there's something I'm just not getting here, we're going to be in the same boat when we've got 3 or 4 companies that bid on this a year from now on a new RFP. Oh, and by the way, this one, Muni Services, is going to have information that they're working on for 200 or 300 cases or whatever that might be, 400, 500, 600 cases, errors that they're out in collecting that we don't know who they are or where they're at, and they claim that they're the property of Muni Services when they're not. And so I think that needs to be figured out, because we're going to continue. We're going to have this discussion a year from now, and rather than do that, then why go out to RFP?
Well, we will, as I mentioned, the RFP will be to select a new firm. There will be some overlap, and I agree with you. It does seem strange that a new firm would come in and have to perform the discovery work all over again. But if there are 2 firms, just because one firm did make the discovery, they do not own the information in the sense that another firm would not be able to independently make the discovery and file
Counsel,
the paperwork.
They would just have to be
Council members?
starting
Yeah.
over, but
If in reading the draft contract that's attached to the RFP and assuming that the current contract has the same language, there is ownership language within the contract, as well as contractor's work paper sections in the contract that basically says that any work done is work for hire, and the city is the owner of that work.
And that's what I'm saying.
That's
So
on
if we own the work,
That's
Do we
on
have
page
copies
4
my
of the
question?
draft contract.
and the answer is no. Should we maintain copies, or periodically, or at least even at contract extension, ask for copies?
So it sounds as though through the work for hire language, we've already anticipated that.
I'm not a lawyer or the city attorney's office, so you may, they could.
You could make the argument. So I think what we should, I think what I would suggest, Mr. President, first of all, do you have any questions on this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the argument, because it seems as if they're paid on contingency fees, that to take the information away and give it to somebody else would preclude work that they've done, and then they're not paid on their fees. So I'm not clear on why we'd have that ability. And also, has this been done on a contingency basis from the beginning?
It has been. And again, we would not know the information until this firm actually submits the paperwork to the county, and the county then independently reviews that claim, and if the county agrees with the work provided by Muni Services, at that point, they would then pay the city, at which point then that's when the vendor would come to us and say, this is the amount that was remitted to the city that was due to the work we performed, and that's the work that we would be the owners of. We would have the detail of what work was performed and what property tax we received due to the work that they performed, and that's when we would calculate the 14.5% contingency fee on that. Prior to them actually formally submitting their paperwork to the county and securing us that extra property tax revenue, there's no way of the city knowing what exactly is in there.
So we don't know the nature of these errors at all.
Excuse me?
We don't know the nature of these types of errors, is my question.
We don't at this point, until they state that they've performed some work and there's money on the
These
table.
could be, these hypothetically then, theoretically, could be errors within the city of LA that, for whatever reason, our tracking systems or whatever that might be, that each and every year they go out and recollect on the same error, perhaps, or something in the county that could be fixed where we're giving away then 15%, or these individual properties that have been filed incorrectly or not found of the owner, or what exactly are these the types of nature of the universe of errors? What are we looking at?
Well, I don't know the nature of the errors. And maybe a controller could answer that. But if these are property tax, then these are things that the county would do. But I think what you're asking is that if this contract isn't extended, or even if it is, that the city will have the ability to go back and look at what these errors are and try to get that the contractor isn't going to say it's proprietary. And I think based on what Mr. Seha was saying is that this is information that the city should have and that we can get, and that we wouldn't have to go back and do this all over again. I think
So,
that was the.
I've got a couple recommendations, and maybe this will bring us to some closure on it. First of all, Section 9 of the contract provides that the city shall have the right to examine the contractor's work papers and require said work papers to be retained for a period of 5 years after the final report is accepted. So I think that language is even more clear than the work for hire language, that we have the right to see it. So I would suggest that on recommendation number 1, we proceed, and by the way, just so I'm clear again, the extension would be at the same contingency rate as we're currently paying of 14.5.
That is correct.
Okay, so I would suggest that we agree with recommendation 1 to execute the supplemental agreement to extend the contract, and that simultaneously we request the right to inspect, or we demand inspection of the work papers that have been produced to date with that extension, so that we can fulfill the, issues that Mr. Englander has raised. With regard to recommendation 2 on releasing the RFP, I would recommend that we afford the Inspector General an opportunity to review the RFP first and to consider whether there are opportunities for consolidation or efficiencies that might be had before we release it, and that we bring that recommendation back here in 30 days. I think we can probably at least get his input within 30 days. And we will again consider releasing the RFP at that point after we hear that report back from him. And then finally, with regard to any contract that's generated from the RFP process, we can continue this discussion, I guess, when it gets reported back. But my recommendation would be that if the contingency fee were to exceed 14.5%, that no contract that would be signed until that fact is reported back to this committee, and we can consider whether to accept that or not.
Okay.
I would have one addition if I could. And I kept saying city, and I kept because I think city, but and don't act county. But the county being the one that collects our property taxes, and the errors were probably, there could be many found with the property owners themselves. Don't know the nature of the errors. If it's a county issue that they haven't fixed, that we haven't brought to their attention, and it's a reoccurring issue in any multitude of this universe of 365 errors, that they simply could continue to find the same error year after year after year, get it, collect on it, if you will, from the county without bringing it to anybody's attention, instead of on a property-by-property basis. That's why it would behoove us to look at the nature of all the errors, because if there are certain errors that are reoccurring and they're not unique in nature, then we can get that problem fixed, get the money in sooner, have the county fix that issue. That's what I was getting at. And so I would ask if you could, when this does come back, have the opportunity to ask for, go ahead and ask for the information, all the errors, and review those to see if there are things that are reoccurring or any patterns or things that the county's doing that we need to get them to fix.
And then if you could report that analysis back to this committee in, say, 90 days, after you've had a chance to review their documents, our documents that are in their custody, if there are recommendations that are appropriate after that review, if you could report those back to this committee. Maybe 90 days is too short, given whatever you think would be a reasonable time to receive our work papers, analyze them, and then report back any recommendations here.
Okay. And I'd just like to mention the errors, as far as the amount of errors, it's a very small percentage of every year for the property tax class we're talking about. We collect roughly $1 billion annually is what the county remits to us for this class property tax. And we're talking about over the 5-year term of this contract, it's averaged less than $1 million more that we've received annually as a due to this contract. So it's a very small number of errors. And usually it has to do with, in the county, there are other cities, and just those border properties is just making sure that it's being allocated to the correct city. So once it is corrected in the county system, it should remain corrected on a go-forward basis. And now other cities are hiring. This firm is working for other cities that are within Alley County. So they're also identifying properties that perhaps we're collecting their property tax right now, and then once they correct it, now they're collecting it. So it is correcting it little by little, but in the scheme of things, it does represent a very, very small portion of the properties.
Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, so just to clarify, I'm assuming we're not asking for the information until they've had a chance to go through the process and through the county and collect it, because otherwise we're asking for information that we could then use to collect it with some other company.
Yeah, I've understood it as a request for the amounts we've paid them in the past. I guess the types of errors they have found is my understanding of the request, to go back and review the amounts that have been collected through this contract and what types of errors that those were made up those amounts.
I'm assuming it's individual cases, so we can actually make sure that they're not redone on an ongoing basis. They're the past cases that we've collected, so that we can review them and make sure that they're handled once and for all, and they're not brought back every year for the same dollar amount. Is that correct?
I mean, why don't you, Mr. Englander, why don't you articulate what you see the issue,
Yes.
the issues to be reported back?
Well, I think
would-
the issue
would
reported
include?
back is, first of all, we've already determined that if it's the current contract language, which is what's being proposed in the new RFP, if it's the same language, in fact, it's our work product, we own it, not them.
The question is,
but-
what is the it?
So the it is looking at the errors. If we could ask, if you could do an evaluation of the types of errors, not specifically, that doesn't have to be by property address, but the types of errors, to see if there are things we need to identify and address to the county to fix, then we should do that. But it's, again, that needs to be evaluated. If it's $1 million, if it seems relatively small, $1 million every year, $1 million here and there starts to add up to real money. And when we're looking for every dollar on the table right now, if those are reoccurring issues, perhaps there are some patterns that we're looking for, just an evaluation of the errors that have been discovered under this contract.
Okay.
Okay, so more of a systemic kind of analysis of where are the areas where we're likely to see recurrence.
Okay.
Okay. So if we got all that, without objection, that will be the action of the committee.
So just to be clear, so is the recommendation to extend the contract is approved, and then with a request to report back on certain items, which we'll get from the clerk?
Yes,
And-
so we'll be holding off on releasing the RFP until the IG has had an opportunity to weigh in. And then my recommendation would also be that any contract that's generated, not the continuation contract, but the new contract following the RFP, would need to be reported back to this committee with a specific contingency fee amount before it's executed. And if it's less than 14.5, then I think you can go ahead and roll with it. But anything in addition to, anything in excess of 14.5 should come back and be reported to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thank
council members.
All right, that brings us to number 7.
Item number 7 is Office of Finance report relative to the annual statement of investment policy effective September 30th, 2012.
Good afternoon.
Tom Juarez, Office of Finance. The report before you, the annual investment report, is being submitted in accordance with the City Administrative Code, where on an annual basis, the City Treasurer will provide this body with a statement of investment policy. The policy itself is an overview and guidelines, if you will, of cash management and investment procedures. And as of note, there were no changes to last year's policy.
emphasis on no changes to last year's policy. Are there any questions? Okay, without objection, we will note and file the report. Thank you very much. Sorry to keep you waiting so long. All right, that brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is Chief Legislative Analyst Report in response to motion Perry Parks relative to the donation of 2 surplus buses to Fame Assistance Corporation.
Good afternoon, Clay McCarter with the Office of the CLA.
Good afternoon.
Our office recommends a below-market sale of 2 surplus buses to Fame Corporations for use in the Metro Job Access and Reverse Commute Program, which will provide transportation services for residents of the city to employment and employment-related activities.
Any questions on this, members? No? Okay, without objection, be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations. Item number 9.
Item number 9 is Chief Legislative Analyst Report in response to motion Garcetti-Labange relative to the donation of 2 surplus buses to the Dream Center.
We also recommend a below-market sale of 2 surplus buses to the Dream Center to be used in the Adopt-a-Block mobile outreach program.
Questions, colleagues?
Move the item.
All right, without objection, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations. And I believe that brings us to the end of our business.
Yes.
There being no other public comment, we are adjourned.